My name is Zara Whitfield, and at 28, I thought I had my life figured out. Last Christmas, while everyone was opening presents around our family tree, I discovered my father had secretly sold my house, the one I'd been paying the mortgage on for 3 years, to cover my sister Melody's gambling debts. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife, but what happened next changed everything. Sometimes the people who should protect you become your greatest enemies, and sometimes karma has the most unexpected way of serving justice. But before we dive into this family nightmare, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more shocking family drama stories. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this tale of betrayal unfolds, because what my father did next will leave you speechless. The discovery came like a sledgehammer to my chest during what should have been the most magical night of the year. December 24th, our family's traditional Christmas Eve gathering at my parents' sprawling colonial home in suburban Atlanta. The smell of my mother's famous honey ham filled the air, Christmas jazz played softly in the background, and snow had actually decided to grace Georgia with its presence for the first time in years. I was in Dad's study, looking for his reading glasses so he could see the fine print on Melody's latest business proposal, another one of her get-rich-quick schemes that never seemed to pan out. That's when I saw the manila folder labeled Property Transfer, Whitfield Residence sitting open on his mahogany desk. My hands trembled as I picked up the documents. There it was, in black and white. A deed transfer for my house on Maple Street, the charming 2-bedroom craftsman I'd fallen in love with 3 years ago. The house I'd scrimped and saved for, working 60-hour weeks as a marketing coordinator at a tech startup. The house where I'd planted a garden, painted every wall myself, and hosted countless dinner parties for friends who'd become my chosen family. But according to these papers, it wasn't my house anymore. It belonged to Melody. The transfer date was December 15th. 9 days ago. 9 days I'd been living in a house that was no longer legally mine, completely oblivious to the fact that my entire world had been sold out from under me. My vision blurred as I read through the documents. The sale price was listed as $350,000, exactly what I'd discovered Melody owed to some very dangerous people after her latest failed venture into cryptocurrency trading. She'd borrowed money from loan sharks, convinced she could triple her investment in some obscure digital currency that promptly crashed to nothing. The worst part? My father had forged my signature on the transfer documents. My own father, the man who'd taught me to ride a bike and walked me down the aisle at my college graduation, had committed fraud to bail out his precious youngest daughter. I heard footsteps in the hallway and quickly shuffled the papers back into the folder, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it would give me away. Mom appeared in the doorway, her silver hair perfectly styled and her red Christmas sweater making her look like a festive grandmother from a Hallmark movie. "Zara, honey, what's taking so long? Your father's getting impatient about opening presents, and you know how he gets when his schedule is disrupted." "Just found them," I managed, holding up Dad's glasses with a smile that felt like it might crack my face in half. Walking back to the living room felt like a death march. There sat my father, looking distinguished in his navy cashmere sweater, silver hair neatly combed, reading glasses perched on his nose as he examined the label on a bottle of wine. The same man who'd always been my hero, my moral compass, the one who'd taught me that honesty and hard work were the foundations of a good life. And there was Melody, sprawled dramatically across the velvet armchair like a queen holding court, her platinum blonde hair cascading over her shoulders, designer dress probably costing more than I made in a month. At 25, she'd never held a job for longer than 6 months, had dropped out of 2 different colleges, and had been bailed out of financial disasters more times than I could count. "Finally!" Melody exclaimed, clapping her hands together. "I'd been dying to show everyone my Christmas surprise." She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through what appeared to be real estate listings. "I'm thinking of completely renovating this adorable little house I just acquired. Maybe turning it into a rental property or flipping it for profit." My blood turned to ice. She was talking about my house. My home. The place where I'd built my independence, where I'd proven to myself and my family that I could make it on my own. That sounds wonderful, sweetheart, Mom cooed, always ready to praise Melody's latest scheme. Where is this property? Oh, it's on Maple Street. Such a quaint neighborhood. The house has good bones, but it needs a complete overhaul. I'm thinking of tearing out all the outdated wallpaper and maybe knocking down some walls to create an open concept. The wallpaper she was talking about tearing down was the vintage floral pattern I'd spent weeks carefully restoring in the breakfast nook. The wall she wanted to knock down separated my home office from the living room, spaces I'd carefully designed to create the perfect work-life balance. That's quite an investment for someone your age, I said, my voice carefully controlled. How did you manage to finance such a purchase? Dad's head snapped up from his wine bottle, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker across his face, guilt, maybe, or fear. But it was gone so quickly I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Oh, I've been saving up, Melody said with a laugh that sounded like wind chimes in a hurricane, beautiful but completely hollow. Plus, Daddy helped me out with some of the paperwork. You know how complicated real estate transactions can be. The room felt like it was spinning. I excused myself to the bathroom, where I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My green eyes, so much like Dad's, looked hollow and shocked. My auburn hair, which I'd inherited from Mom's side of the family, hung limp around my shoulders. I pulled out my phone and quickly called my mortgage company's 24-hour helpline. After navigating through several automated menus and waiting on hold for what felt like an eternity, I finally reached a representative. I'm calling to check on my account status for the property at 42 Maple Street, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm sorry, ma'am, but according to our records, that loan was paid in full on December 15th, and the property has been transferred to a new owner. The account is closed. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto the bathroom tiles. Paid in full. Transferred to a new owner. My 3-year mortgage, with $200,000 still remaining, had simply vanished. I picked up the phone with shaking hands and ended the call. Through the thin bathroom door, I could hear my family's laughter echoing from the living room, the sound now seeming sinister and mocking. My father had stolen my house to save his favorite daughter, and they were all sitting around our Christmas tree acting like nothing had happened. But this was just the beginning of the nightmare, and I was about to learn that sometimes the people you trust most are capable of betrayals you never saw coming. I stood in that bathroom for exactly 10 minutes, watching the second hand of the antique wall clock tick by while my entire world reorganized itself into a new, terrifying reality. The woman staring back at me from the mirror wasn't the same person who'd walked into this house 2 hours ago carrying homemade cookies and Christmas presents. That woman had been naive enough to believe in family loyalty and honest enough to assume the best in people she loved. This woman was different. This woman was calculating. I returned to the living room with a smile plastered across my face, determined to gather more information before making any moves. The art of war, I realized, begins with reconnaissance. Melody, that house sounds absolutely perfect for you, I said, settling onto the couch next to Mom. When do you close on it? Oh, the closing already happened. Can you believe how fast everything moved? Daddy found this amazing real estate attorney who expedited the whole process. Sometimes when you see the perfect opportunity, you just have to grab it, Perfect opportunity. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. I glanced at Dad, who was suddenly very interested in adjusting the logs in the fireplace, his back turned to our conversation. That's incredible, I continued, my voice honey-sweet. And you mentioned Daddy helped with the paperwork? He was amazing, Melody gushed, launching into what seemed like a rehearsed speech. He handled all the legal documentation, coordinated with the attorneys, even managed the financial arrangements. I honestly don't know what I would have done without him. You know how hopeless I am with that kind of stuff. Hopeless with that kind of stuff. Right. The same person who'd somehow managed to navigate cryptocurrency exchanges well enough to lose hundreds of thousands of dollars was suddenly too helpless to handle basic real estate paperwork. Mom beamed with pride. Your father has always been so good at helping his girls achieve their dreams. Remember when he co-signed for your first apartment, Zara? And now he's helping Melody become a property investor. What a blessing to have such a supportive father. The irony was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. Dad had co-signed for my apartment because I'd been 22 with no credit history. He was helping Melody by committing fraud and stealing from his other daughter. Speaking of my apartment, I said, testing the waters, I should probably update my homeowner's insurance policy soon. The premiums have been getting expensive. Dad finally turned around from the fireplace, his face carefully neutral. Insurance costs are certainly rising everywhere, he said. Perhaps it's time to shop around for better rates. He was good, I had to give him that. Not a flicker of guilt or acknowledgement that I wouldn't be needing homeowners insurance much longer since I no longer own a home. The evening continued with its surreal normalcy. We opened presents. I gave Dad a leather-bound journal for his retirement planning, and he gave me a gift certificate to a home improvement store with a note about making my space even more beautiful. The cruel irony of that gift would have been funny if it weren't so devastating. Melody received the usual bounty of expensive gifts, designer purses, jewelry, electronics. Mom mentioned that Dad had given Melody a very special early Christmas present this year, something that would set her up for future success. My special early Christmas present, apparently, was homelessness. As the night wound down, I volunteered to help clean up, desperate for a few more minutes to process and plan. While loading the dishwasher, I overheard Dad and Melody talking in hushed tones by the back door. Remember what we discussed, Dad was saying. This arrangement needs to stay between us for now. Zara doesn't need to know the details until after the holidays. Of course, Daddy. But what if she asks questions? You know how nosy she can be about finances. Let me handle Zara. I've been managing her expectations her whole life. Trust me, by the time she finds out, it'll all be resolved, and she'll understand it was for the best. Managing my expectations. For the best. As if stealing my house was some kind of parenting strategy designed to teach me a valuable life lesson. I finished cleaning in silence, my mind racing through possibilities. Going to the police seemed like the obvious choice, but pressing charges against my own father felt impossible, especially with Mom's health issues. She'd been battling anxiety and high blood pressure for years. The stress of a family legal battle could literally kill her. But I wasn't going to roll over and accept this betrayal either. As I drove home to my house, my former house, that night, I began formulating a plan. Dad thought he could manage my expectations and manipulate me into accepting this theft. Melody thought she could steal my home and redecorate it like some kind of twisted housewarming gift to herself. They were both about to learn that they'd severely underestimated me. The first step was documentation. I spent the rest of Christmas night photographing every inch of my home, every improvement I'd made, every personal touch that made it mine. I gathered receipts for the down payment, mortgage statements, records of every payment I'd made. I documented the garden I'd planted, the custom shelving I'd installed, the vintage light fixtures I'd restored. Then I started researching fraud, forgery, elder abuse laws. Because at 65, Dad fell into that category, even though he was the perpetrator, not the victim. Real estate law. Title insurance. Every legal avenue I could explore to reclaim what was rightfully mine. But more importantly, I started researching Melody's creditors. If my father had sold my house to pay off her gambling debts, that meant there were some very dangerous people who'd been expecting payment. People who might be very interested to learn that the money they'd received had come from criminal activity. The beautiful thing about loan sharks and underground gambling operations is that they don't particularly care about family dynamics. They care about getting paid, and they definitely don't appreciate being connected to fraud schemes that could bring law enforcement attention to their businesses. By 3 in the morning, I'd created a comprehensive file with everything I needed to not just reclaim my house, but to ensure that both my father and Melody faced serious consequences for their betrayal. I also had a backup plan that would protect Mom from the worst of the fallout. But first, I needed allies. And I knew exactly where to find them. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Riley. "How was Christmas with the family? Hope Melody didn't drive you too crazy with her latest drama." I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Emergency coffee date tomorrow? I need to tell you something that's going to change everything." Because sometimes when your blood family betrays you, you have to remember that the family you choose can be stronger than the family you're born into. And I was about to learn just how powerful that chosen family could be when it came time to fight back. Riley Martinez had been my best friend since college, and she possessed two qualities that made her invaluable in a crisis. She was a paralegal at one of Atlanta's most prestigious law firms, and she had absolutely zero tolerance for injustice. When I called her at 6 in the morning on December 25th, she answered on the second ring. "This better be good, Whitfield." I was having the most amazing dream about Ryan Gosling and a tropical beach. "Riley, I need you to meet me at our usual coffee shop in an hour. And bring your legal brain. My family just committed fraud, and I need to figure out how to destroy them without destroying myself in the process." Silence. "Then, I'll be there in 30 minutes. And Zara? Don't do anything stupid until I get there." The coffee shop was nearly empty on Christmas morning, just a few travelers and hospital workers grabbing caffeine between shifts. Riley arrived looking like she'd thrown on clothes and run out the door, her usually perfect black hair pulled into a messy bun, but her dark eyes were sharp and focused. I laid out everything: the forged documents, the secret house sale, Melody's gambling debts, Dad's betrayal, the conversation I'd overheard. Riley listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on her phone, her expression growing more serious with each revelation. "Okay," she said finally, "this is bad. Like, federal fraud charges bad. But it's also incredibly stupid on their part, which works in our favor." She pulled up several legal databases on her phone. Property fraud involving forged signatures is a felony in Georgia. The fact that it crosses state lines, because some of Melody's creditors are likely based in other states, could make it federal. Your father could be looking at serious prison time. "I don't want him to go to prison," I said quickly. "I just want my house back and for them to face consequences. Honey, once you report fraud, you don't get to control the outcome. The state prosecutes crimes, not victims. If you want to handle this quietly, we need to be very strategic." She was right. This wasn't just about recovering my property, it was about sending a message that I wouldn't be manipulated or stolen from ever again. But it was also about protecting Mom and ensuring that justice was served in a way that actually benefited me. "There's something else," Riley continued, scrolling through her notes. "If your father used forged documents to transfer the property, the sale itself is legally void. Melody doesn't actually own your house. She thinks she does, but legally, you're still the rightful owner." A spark of hope ignited in my chest. "So I can just move back in?" "Not quite that simple. We need to prove the fraud first, and that means gathering evidence that will hold up in court. But yes, ultimately, the house should revert to you." Over the next hour, Riley outlined a comprehensive strategy. First, we'd need to prove the signature forgery through handwriting analysis. Second, we'd need to demonstrate that I never consented to or received compensation for the sale. Third, we'd need to show that the transfer was done to defraud creditors. Specifically, Melody's gambling debts. But as we talked, a more elegant solution began to emerge. "What if," I said slowly, "we let them think they got away with it? At least for a while?" Riley raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "Melody thinks she owns my house. She's planning to renovate it, maybe flip it for profit. That means she's going to invest even more money into the property, money she probably doesn't have, which means more debt. Meanwhile, I gather evidence, build an ironclad case, and when the time is right, I take it all back. That's actually brilliant. And incredibly risky. But think about it. Right now, if I expose the fraud immediately, Dad might face charges, but Melody just loses a house she never legally owned anyway. She doesn't really lose anything. This way, she invests her own money into improvements on my house, and when the truth comes out, I get my property back plus all the improvements she paid for. Riley grinned. You devious genius. But we need to document everything she does to the house. Every renovation, every dollar spent, every change made. And we need to do it in a way that's legally admissible. That's when I remembered my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson. 80-year-old retired librarian who'd lived across the street from my house for 40 years and had an unobstructed view of my front yard from her kitchen window. She also happened to have a security camera system installed after a break-in scare last year. More importantly, Mrs. Henderson despised Melody. The previous summer, Melody had visited my house for a barbecue and had parked her BMW across Mrs. Henderson's driveway, blocking the elderly woman's access to her own home for 3 hours. When Mrs. Henderson politely asked her to move, Melody had laughed and said she'd move when she felt like it. I'd ended up moving the car myself with Melody's spare key, but the damage was done. Mrs. Henderson would be the perfect witness, I told Riley. She's sharp as a tack, she has video evidence of everyone who comes and goes, and she'll be more than happy to help take down Melody. Now we're talking. What about inside the house? How do we document what happens inside? I thought about that for a moment. Melody mentioned wanting to rent it out or flip it. That means she'll probably hire contractors, and contractors always document their work for insurance and payment purposes. If I can figure out who she's hiring. You could get copies of their work orders, receipts, before and after photos, Riley finished. Everything we'd need to prove how much money she invested in property she didn't actually own. The plan was taking shape, but it required patience and precision. I'd have to watch my own home being transformed by the person who'd stolen it from me, all while gathering evidence for the eventual reckoning. There's one more thing, Riley said, her expression turning serious. Your father's not stupid. He's going to realize eventually that you know something. We need to control the timeline, and we need backup plans for when things go sideways. She was right. Dad had been managing people his whole career as a financial advisor. He knew how to read situations and manipulate outcomes. If I was going to outmaneuver him, I needed to think several steps ahead. I have an idea about that too, I said. What if we give him something else to worry about? I told Riley about my research into Melody's creditors. The loan sharks who'd been paid off with the proceeds from my house sale might be very interested to learn that their payment had come from criminal activity. If that money was later deemed proceeds of fraud, it could technically be seized as evidence. You want to sick loan sharks on your own sister? Riley asked. I want to create pressure from multiple directions. If Dad thinks he's solved Melody's problems by stealing my house, he's wrong. All he's done is create a bigger problem. And when that pressure starts building, people make mistakes. Riley leaned back in her chair, studying my face. You know, when I woke up this morning, I never expected to spend Christmas planning a family takedown worthy of a crime thriller. Neither did I. But here we are. Here we are, she agreed. So what's our first move? I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Mrs. Henderson's contact. We start building our surveillance network. Then we sit back and watch Melody dig herself into a hole so deep that when the truth comes out, she won't be able to climb back out. As I typed a text to my neighbor asking if she'd like to have coffee and discuss some concerning activity in the neighborhood, I felt something I hadn't experienced since discovering those documents in Dad's study: hope. They thought they'd stolen my house and my future. What they'd actually done was give me the perfect opportunity to teach them both a lesson about consequences they'd never forget. The question wasn't whether karma was coming for my father and sister, it was whether they'd see it coming before it destroyed them both. This story is getting intense, and the revenge is just getting started. 3 months later, I watched from Mrs. Henderson's kitchen window as yet another contractor truck pulled up to my house. The house that still legally belonged to me, though Melody remained blissfully unaware of this fact. She'd already spent $60,000 on renovations, transforming my cozy craftsman into what she called a modern luxury rental property. Mrs. Henderson poured me another cup of tea and shook her head. That girl has had 12 different work crews here since January. 12. The noise is unbearable, and the way she talks to those poor workers is disgraceful. I'd been documenting everything through Mrs. Henderson's security footage and my own careful reconnaissance. Melody had ripped out my carefully restored hardwood floors and replaced them with expensive tile. She'd torn down the wall between my office and living room, just as she'd threatened. Most painfully, she'd destroyed my vintage floral wallpaper and painted everything in stark white. But every change was documented. Every receipt was photographed. Every contractor had been interviewed by Riley, who'd posed as a potential client for her own renovation project. The permits alone must have cost her $15,000, Mrs. Henderson continued. And she's been bragging to anyone who'll listen about her investment property portfolio. Yesterday she told the mailman she's planning to buy 3 more houses this year. That was interesting. If Melody was planning more property investments, she was either expecting a significant income increase or planning to leverage the house she thought she owned. Either way, she was digging herself deeper into financial commitments based on assets she didn't actually possess. My phone buzzed with a text from Riley, "Legal papers are ready." Handwriting analysis confirmed forgery. "We have everything we need. Are you ready to pull the trigger?" I looked out the window one more time. Melody was standing in my front yard, gesturing dramatically while talking on her phone. She was wearing a designer coat that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and she looked every inch the successful real estate investor she pretended to be. It was time to remind her what reality looked like. I texted back, "Do it." The process moved faster than I'd expected. Riley had prepared everything through her firm's pro bono program. Technically, I qualified because the property fraud had left me essentially homeless, even though I'd been staying in a friend's guest room rather than dealing with the emotional devastation of sleeping in my stolen house. The first domino fell on a Tuesday morning when a sheriff's deputy knocked on Melody's door with legal documents declaring the property sale void and demanding she cease all renovation activities immediately. I wasn't there to see her reaction, but Mrs. Henderson gleefully described it as epic and involving quite a lot of colorful language. The second domino fell an hour later when Dad's phone started ringing. Melody called him crying, then screaming, then threatening to expose whatever secrets she thought she could use as leverage. I'd anticipated this reaction and had positioned myself at a coffee shop across from Dad's office building. Through the window, I watched him pace back and forth in his corner office, his normally composed demeanor cracking under pressure. He made several phone calls, probably trying to reach his lawyer or figure out damage control strategies. The third domino was my favorite. I'd anonymously provided Melody's creditors with information about the source of their payments, along with documentation that those payments might be subject to seizure as proceeds of fraud. The loan sharks who'd received their money from my house sale were suddenly very interested in having a conversation with Melody about alternative repayment arrangements. By Thursday, I owned my house again. The court had fast-tracked the property restoration based on the clear evidence of fraud and forgery. Melody was facing a civil lawsuit for the money she'd invested in renovations, plus potential criminal charges for receiving stolen property, even though she claimed ignorance. Dad was facing federal fraud charges and the potential loss of his financial advisor license. His legal bills alone would probably bankrupt him, assuming he avoided prison time. But the sweetest revenge was still coming. On Friday afternoon, I stood in my reclaimed home, surveying all the improvements Melody had inadvertently made for me. The expensive tile flooring was actually beautiful, even if I missed my original hardwood. The open concept layout created more space for entertaining. The updated kitchen with its granite countertops and stainless steel appliances had probably increased my home's value by $50,000. Melody had essentially given me a free luxury renovation while simultaneously destroying her own financial future. My phone rang. Dad's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring 4 times before answering. "Zara, we need to talk." His voice was strained, aged beyond his years. "Do we?" "Because I seem to remember you thinking I didn't need to know about my own house being sold until after the holidays. Your exact words were that you'd been managing my expectations my whole life." Silence. Then, "How long have you known?" "Since Christmas Eve. I found the paperwork in your study while looking for your glasses." More silence. I could picture him sitting in his office, finally understanding that his careful manipulation had been exposed from the very beginning. "I was trying to protect both of you girls," he said finally. Melody was in real danger from those people she owed money to. They were threatening violence. I couldn't let anything happen to her. So instead you decided to destroy my life to save hers. Did you ever consider that I might have helped if you just asked? Did you think about the fact that I was actually in a better position to help her than you were? You would have said no. You'll never know, will you? Because you chose to steal from me instead of treating me like an adult capable of making my own decisions. I hung up. That evening, Riley brought champagne to celebrate my victory. We sat in my renovated living room, toasting to justice served and lessons learned. "So what happens to them now?" she asked. "Dad will probably avoid prison if he accepts a plea deal and pays restitution. He'll lose his license and his reputation, but Mom will be okay financially if they sell the big house and downsize. Melody will have to figure out how to rebuild her life without Daddy's safety net. And you?" I looked around my transformed home. "I get to start over, but this time with a much clearer understanding of who I can trust and who I can't." My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "This is Melody. I know you orchestrated all of this. You destroyed our family out of spite." I showed Riley the message. She raised her eyebrows. "How are you going to respond?" I typed back, "I didn't destroy our family. I exposed what our family really was. There's a difference." Then I blocked her number and poured myself another glass of champagne. Sometimes karma needs a little help, but when it finally arrives, the satisfaction is worth every moment of careful planning it took to deliver it. The fallout was swift and merciless. Within a week of the legal papers being served, the local newspaper picked up the story. Prominent financial advisor charged with property fraud ran as a front-page headline in the business section, complete with photos of Dad's office building and quotes from anonymous sources detailing the family drama behind the charges. Dad's client base evaporated overnight. 30 years of building trust and reputation destroyed in a single news cycle. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd spent his career advising people about protecting their assets and making sound financial decisions, only to lose everything by making the worst possible choice when it came to his own family. I drove past his office building on Wednesday morning and saw the for lease sign already posted in the window. The receptionist I'd known since childhood was carrying a box of personal items to her car, looking shell-shocked and unemployed. Mom called me for the first time since Christmas, her voice thin and shaky. "Zara, honey, I don't understand what's happening. Your father says there's been some kind of misunderstanding about Melody's house?" "It's my house, Mom. It was always my house. Dad stole it to pay Melody's gambling debts, and now he's facing the consequences." "But that can't be right. Your father would never. He's always been so honest, so ethical." The conversation broke my heart in ways I hadn't expected. Mom genuinely had no idea what Dad had done. She'd been living in the same house with a criminal and never suspected a thing. Her faith in her husband of 35 years was crumbling in real time, and I could hear it happening through the phone. "Mom, I have copies of all the documents. The forged signatures, the fraudulent transfer papers, everything. I didn't want any of this to happen, but I couldn't let him steal from me and get away with it." She hung up without saying goodbye. Melody's response was more dramatic and far more public. She posted a lengthy Facebook rant about family betrayal and vindictive sisters who destroy lives for revenge. According to her version of events, she was an innocent victim who'd been manipulated by Dad into accepting a house she didn't know was stolen. The post backfired spectacularly. Several people commented with screenshots of her own previous posts bragging about her real estate investments and property acquisition strategies. Her story about being an innocent victim fell apart under basic scrutiny. More damaging was the response from her loan shark creditors. Apparently, they were not amused by the public attention Melody's social media drama was bringing to their business operations. I learned this through Riley, who had connections in the district attorney's office. "Word is that Melody's been getting some very unfriendly visits," Riley reported over lunch. "The kind of people your father borrowed from don't like being connected to fraud investigations. They're suggesting she might want to consider relocating to a different city." "Is she going to be okay?" Riley shrugged. "Define okay." "She's not in physical danger, but she's essentially been blacklisted from every gambling establishment in the Southeast. Her credit is destroyed, she's facing civil lawsuits for the renovation money, and now she's dealing with criminals who want her to disappear." I should have felt more satisfied by Melody's downfall, but mostly I felt exhausted. This was my sister, the little girl I'd taught to ride a bike and helped with homework for years. Watching her life implode was harder than I'd expected, even knowing she'd brought it on herself. The hardest part was Dad. 3 weeks after the legal proceedings began, I found him sitting in his car outside my house at 6 in the morning. He looked like he'd aged a decade and a month. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his hair uncombed, his expensive suit wrinkled. I made coffee and met him on my front porch, the porch that was definitively, legally mine again. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said without preamble. "I just need you to understand why I did it." "I understand perfectly. Melody was in trouble, and you decided that saving her was more important than protecting me. You made a choice. Those weren't ordinary debts, Zara. The people she owed money to were threatening to hurt her. One of them showed me pictures of what they'd done to other people who couldn't pay." I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or deflection. Instead, I saw genuine fear and regret. "So you committed fraud instead of calling the police? Instead of helping her file for bankruptcy? Instead of asking me if I'd be willing to help?" I panicked. Melody came to me crying, showing me these threatening messages, and all I could think about was protecting my little girl. "I'm your daughter too." The words hung between us like a physical barrier. Dad's face crumpled, and for the first time in my life, I watched my father cry. "I know," he whispered. "I know, and I failed you completely. I've spent the last month trying to figure out how to undo what I did, how to make this right, and there's no way. I destroyed everything." We sat in silence for several minutes. The morning was crisp and clear, the kind of perfect spring day that makes you believe in new beginnings. Across the street, Mrs. Henderson was tending to her garden, carefully not looking in our direction but obviously listening to every word. "What's going to happen to Mom?" I asked finally. "We're selling the house. Downsizing to a condo. She'll be okay financially, but I don't know if she'll ever forgive me for the lies." "Have you talked to Melody?" Dad laughed bitterly. "Melody blames me for everything. According to her, I should have found a different way to solve her problems. She's moved to Nashville, staying with some friends she met online. She says she's starting over, but she hasn't learned anything. She's already talking about new business opportunities, new investment schemes. She thinks this was all just bad luck instead of the consequence of her choices. That was the moment I realized that my revenge had been successful beyond my wildest imagination. I'd gotten my house back, plus significant improvements. Dad was facing real consequences for his criminal behavior. Melody had lost everything and been forced to leave town. But more importantly, the family dynamic that had enabled decades of dysfunction had finally collapsed. The unspoken rules that protected Melody from consequences while expecting me to be the responsible one were finished. Dad's role as the family patriarch who could manipulate situations to protect his favorite daughter was over. For the first time in my life, I was free from the expectation that I'd sacrifice my own well-being for family harmony. 6 months later, I was hosting my first dinner party in my newly renovated home. The guests weren't my blood family, Mom was still barely speaking to me, and Melody remained in Nashville posting vague social media updates about new opportunities and learning to trust again. Dad and I maintained a cautious relationship built on weekly coffee meetings where we slowly rebuilt trust through actions rather than words. Instead, my dining room was filled with the family I'd chosen: Riley and her girlfriend Sarah, Mrs. Henderson from across the street, my college friend Marcus who'd driven down from Charlotte, and 3 coworkers who'd become genuine friends over the years. We were celebrating my promotion to marketing director at the tech startup. A position I'd earned partly because the leadership skills I'd developed while orchestrating my family's downfall had translated perfectly to managing complex business strategies. To Zara, Riley raised her wine glass, who proved that sometimes the best revenge is living well and getting everything you deserve. To justice served, Mrs. Henderson added with a wicked grin. The 80-year-old had become my unofficial grandmother and favorite partner in crime. She'd started a neighborhood watch program that was really just an excuse to gather intel on everyone's business. As everyone laughed and toasted, I looked around my transformed home. Melody's expensive renovations had increased the property value by $70,000, according to my latest appraisal. The insurance settlement from the fraud case had covered my legal fees and provided additional compensation for the emotional distress of being temporarily homeless. I'd taken a portion of that money to establish a trust fund for Mom, ensuring she'd be financially secure regardless of Dad's legal troubles. Dad had ultimately accepted a plea deal that included 3 years of probation, community service, and full restitution to me, which meant paying for all of Melody's renovation costs plus damages. He'd sold their family home and moved Mom into a comfortable condo, where she was slowly adjusting to a simpler life and beginning to understand the extent of his betrayal. The real satisfaction, though, wasn't financial. It was the knowledge that I'd stood up for myself and refused to be a victim. For 28 years, I'd been the responsible daughter who quietly accepted whatever family dynamic suited everyone else's needs. I'd been expected to understand Melody's mistakes, forgive Dad's favoritism, and prioritize family peace over my own well-being. That version of me was gone forever. You know what I realized today? I said to the table as we finished dessert. This time last year, I thought family meant accepting whatever treatment people gave you just because you shared DNA. I thought loyalty meant never fighting back, even when someone was hurting you. And now? Sarah asked. Now I know that real family shows up when you need them, supports your growth instead of expecting you to stay small, and celebrates your victories instead of trying to tear you down. I gestured around the table. This is my real family. Mrs. Henderson dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. You know, dear, I've lived in this neighborhood for 40 years, and I've watched dozens of young people come and go. Most of them, when faced with real adversity, either crumble or run away. You're the first person I've seen who turned betrayal into power. After dinner, as we cleaned dishes and shared stories, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The area code was Nashville. Zara, it's Melody. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know that I'm in therapy now. Real therapy, not just the court-mandated stuff. I'm starting to understand how my choices affected everyone, including you. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I know I don't deserve it yet. I just wanted you to know that I'm working on becoming a different person. I showed the message to Riley, who raised her eyebrows. How does that make you feel? Honestly? Glad for her, but cautious. She said similar things before. Are you going to respond? I thought about it for a moment, then typed back, I'm glad you're getting help. Recovery is hard work, but you're worth it. Take care of yourself. I didn't add that I'd believe her commitment to change when I saw sustained evidence of it, or that forgiveness would require years of consistent different behavior. Some lessons have to be learned through experience rather than explanation. As my friends prepared to leave, Mrs. Henderson pulled me aside on the front porch. I have something for you, she said, handing me a small wrapped box. A housewarming gift for the house you already owned. Inside was a vintage key holder with an inscription, "Home is where your story begins." Below it, in Mrs. Henderson's careful handwriting, was a note, for the young woman who rewrote her story and reclaimed her power. After everyone left, I sat on my renovated back deck with a cup of tea, looking out at the garden I'd replanted after Melody's contractors had destroyed my original landscaping. The new plants were still small, but they were growing strong in soil that was definitively, unquestionably mine. My phone rang, Dad's weekly check-in call. How was your dinner party? He asked. Perfect. How was your therapy session? Dad had started counseling as part of his plea agreement, but he'd continued it voluntarily as he worked to understand how he justified such devastating choices. Difficult. We talked about favoritism and how I confused protecting with enabling. That sounds painful. It is. But necessary. Zara, I want you to know that watching you rebuild your life, seeing the strength you've shown through all of this, I'm proud of you. I should have said that more when you were growing up. Thanks, Dad. I'm proud of me too. After we hung up, I realized that was the first time in my life I'd ever said those words out loud. I was proud of myself for refusing to be a victim, for turning betrayal into empowerment, for building a life surrounded by people who valued and supported me. Sometimes family karma isn't about punishment, it's about breaking cycles and choosing better. My father learned that his actions have consequences. Melody learned that other people won't always save her from herself. Mom learned that even long marriages can hide devastating betrayals. And I learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to accept treatment that diminishes your worth. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and self-respect? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes sharing our experiences helps others find the courage to stand up for themselves. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life tales of justice, growth, and the power of chosen family. And don't forget to share this with anyone who might need a reminder that they deserve to be treated with respect, even by people who are supposed to love them unconditionally. Thank you for taking this journey with me, and remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting better. Life has taught me that karma always comes around, but sometimes we have to be brave enough to help it along.